Welcome to another episode of Courageous Healing. I am the producer and host, Victor Escalante. Today, Adele is on the road and she won't be joining us, but we have a very special guest for you. Her name is Suzanna Abel, who is a licensed professional counselor, educator with 20 years of experience. She mainly works with adults 18 years to 80 years, suffering with anxiety, depression, perfectionism, divorce recovery, abusive relationships, and she's been very successful at working with clients suffering with alcohol use disorder using a pharmacological approach. So we're going to find out all about that. Today, we've decided to bring in Suzanna because there is so much anxiety as a result of the post-presidential election. But not only that, it's like as a country, after COVID, we suffer from generalized anxiety. And Suzanna and I are going to have a very interesting conversation about that and many other things related to help you heal in your journey or just to manage your emotional states at present. Suzanna, welcome to Courageous Healing. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this field.
Well, my story is actually very personal. I was in the news reporting field, and then I found out that my children were going blind. I found out that my son was losing his vision and my daughter. And this was a long time ago, before the internet was around and there was no social media. And so I was very isolated and alone. I didn't know what to do and I had to figure it out on my own. So I decided that I didn't want anybody else to have to go through that. And so I went back to school to become a counselor in the school district to help the students. And while I was there, I realized I needed to help the parents. So I went back to school to get my LPC. So then I could help guide people through their.
Now, I also have a background in legacy media. Which media did you work in?
I worked at a little local radio station in Lafayette.
Okay. You did production, news reporting, community programming. Okay. That's a very creative field, and I love it. I love it. People don't know what really goes on behind the scenes to put on a good quality show because there's so many different moving parts, especially when you get more into the complex network industry, which I work with a couple. So it's interesting that we share that in common. So you became a licensed professional counselor. Tell us, how did your background shape your approach to the work that you do today?
Well, I have to say that my life experiences and overcoming the struggles with my children gave me a very unique approach to counseling other people who are going through problems because I lived it. It's not just stuff I read in a book.
Yes.
And also, as a sufferer of complex PTSD, I use a very trauma-informed approach to all my therapeutic interventions.
Tell us what that means, because our listeners may not be familiar with that term.
That means I consider trauma first and foremost. And so that's what we're going to look at to make sure that there's not trauma present before we dig into any other intervention.
As a clinician, one clinician to another, why is that important as a foundation if you're going to do any kind of, there's two kinds of therapy. There's remedial for just maybe 1 to 3 sessions, and there is generative change that is more long-term. So whether it's remedial or whether it's the other type, why do you think you need to consider, is there trauma in this person's life?
Because if we can go back and deal with the issues surrounding the trauma, and if they did have PTSD, or there's different levels of trauma, right? There's the little t traumas that can happen over the course of a person's life, and then there's the big T traumas, like being in a war or witnessing a mass shooting. And then there's complex trauma where someone's traumatized consistently over numerous years.
That would be something like domestic violence, that you're exposed to that kind of systemic violence or abuse day in and day out for years. Yeah. Okay.
And children who were raised in abusive homes.
Yes, there is the secondary trauma of being a witness to trauma.
Yes, there is.
Just like children of alcoholics, they have their own issues as a result of being exposed to the trauma. Okay? So what advice would you give to listeners trying to manage their own anxiety or stress about this topic of anxiety?
Well, are you talking about anxiety just
in general?
To,
whether it's to the election, whether it's something that a person is triggered, what general advice would you give to someone?
Well, I think that practicing mindfulness is key. And I know that mindfulness has become a buzzword now, but it's a practice. And if you really dig into it and just like shut out the world for 30 seconds and focus on your breathing.
Yes.
And focus on yourself and quiet your thoughts.
Now, you and I know what that means, okay? But again, I want to get granular. Give us the specifics of how you can develop mindfulness through a focus on your breathing. Tell us how you instruct patients.
Okay. So when my patients come in, we do the 30-second breathing. I set a timer. I tell them that they're just going to focus on their breath. That breathing is the most intimate thing you do with your body. When you breathe in, you're giving life to your body.
Yes.
When you breathe out, you're giving life to the plant. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. And so I tell them to focus on that. Now, their thoughts are going to wander. That's okay. Bring it back to your breath. Your thoughts are going to wander. Bring it back to your breath. And the more you practice it, the less your thoughts wander. And you have that 30 seconds to focus on.
About this, I read a study that was done at Cambridge that if you take in deep breaths and you breathe out as though you're breathing out through a straw, like this, until you completely clear your lungs. By that simple exercise, you're actually developing new neural connections in the prefrontal cortex, because that's just what they discovered as a result of the research at Cambridge. And again, if you need a straw, get you a straw and blow through the straw until you completely empty your lungs. And again, that's one technique that you can use to really focus on your breathing, because you're right. Not only are you oxygenating the brain, which again begins to dissolve the anxiety and the stress, and you're actually giving life to your body. What other techniques can you recommend?
In reference to what you were talking about, breathing out through the straw, you can also do breathing where you breathe in for 5 and you release for 8.
Okay.
If you can exhale longer than you inhale, your central nervous system automatically thinks you're safe.
Yes.
It's very effective. It bypasses thoughts. So you don't have to stop your thoughts. That exhaling longer than you inhale, which with what you were talking about with the straw, sends a message to your central nervous system to relax.
Yes.
And your body will just relax.
Let me ask you, since you bring this up, talk about the sympathetic nervous system, okay? Because we've talked about this in a previous episode, but I want to hear from you. Give a general explanation of what happens in your body when you're terrified or anxious as a result of your sympathetic nervous system being triggered or going into that panic response.
Well, it's like every muscle in your body is tightened without you even being aware of it.
Yes.
You're on high alert, what we would call the flight part of the trauma response. And what I have found through my research and even with dealing with my clients is that in this day and age, we're always at that sympathetic level where we're always at high alert. I mean, I live in Houston, so just driving on the freeways, I got to practice my breathing when I'm on 290. It's just using those techniques.
Yes, I was reading a story that in today's world, like we are so stimulated in one day, which is the equivalent of like a decade from past generations. I'm talking, 50s, 40s. that there wasn't that much stimulation. And so our nervous system is assaulted every day from all the different stressors, all the input, all the different decisions that we have to make. And then what happens is we get acclimated to the stress, and we're not even aware that we stop living in our body because we dissociate into the head. And then we're not aware, we're disconnected from our body. And again, we're not being mindful of the entire whole as a person, just escaping to the mind. And social media doesn't help us any in that regard because it keeps us hijacked constantly.
Absolutely. And our phones, we have them all the time. 20 years ago, I didn't have a phone in my hand all the time, and I could go outside and take a walk without my phone. But I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'll be at the park walking and I see people walking with their phones.
Yes.
And that keeps that. I mean, they're still getting the benefit of walking, don't get me wrong, but not enjoying the park and the sun and the trees and noticing the beauty right around them.
Yeah, one time I practiced mindfulness in walking. There is supposedly a technique. I didn't go that much into it, but just being so mindful of every step that you take, that again, it's like you're very present oriented, taking in the environment and noticing how your body responds to the ground with every step that you take, which again is very, very useful because you are retraining the brain to form new neural connections as opposed to just defaulting into the normal routine. Yes. Okay. Very good. Are there any common misconceptions about how people can handle stress and anxiety in situations such as the one that we're living just post-election?
I know some people think that stress and anxiety might just fade over time. Like if they just don't pay attention to it.
That's magical thinking.
Maybe put it aside.
Yes.
That it's just going to go away. But it doesn't. You may experience a decrease in your anxiety after a major event like this past election, but that anxiety is still there. And a lot of people are worried about the future, right? And they may be able to put that down, but they're still worried about the future.
I had a subscription to the New York Times. I canceled it. I eliminated Twitter, and I'm only on Facebook because of business and work-related projects that I have going on, and LinkedIn. And I deleted the news app on my iPhone, and I have consumed zero news since the election. Okay?
Do you miss it?
No, I don't, because I have more time to focus on more important things, to focus on myself, to find the inner peace, and to focus on my health, becoming more fit physically, and again, just focus on priorities and projects that really satisfy me, and that's, I just made up my mind, and I don't know what you did or what you're doing in order to just shut out the world. It's like shut out the noise. This is not the first time that we're going through a major change in our country, and it probably won't be the last, and we will get past it. And yes, it's going to be very messy. It's going to be hurtful for a lot of people, but you cannot change anything unless you are actually in politics and in government. So why stress over it? Why go into panic attacks, feeding your mind as far as what the worst case scenarios that could be, when they may or may not happen, and if they happen, you can't do anything about it.
I know, but people don't know to do that, right? They'll still be watching the news. They'll still be trying to check.
Yes, this is where we have to take ownership of our well-being, and it's got to start somewhere. If you can't go cold turkey, you know, like you and I both have worked with addicts. If you can't go cold turkey, start small and build up. Start by doing something as opposed to doing nothing. Doing nothing is not a solution.
Yeah, and I recommend, like, if you just can't stop watching the news, set aside a specific time during the day that you're going to watch the news for 15 minutes or scroll for 15 minutes instead of the doom scrolling over
Yes.
and over for hours on end. Set a time limit before you watch the news. Don't talk about politics on social media.
Exactly.
In your workplace, or if someone is talking about politics and it upsets you.
Or with family. Yeah. Like Adele has a father that always wants to talk politics, and so she had to tell him, Dad, I don't want to talk about it. And that's all it took. Just put a boundary and say, I don't want to talk about it.
Set boundaries with other people and set boundaries with yourself.
Yes.
You're not going to do that.
Because I always tell listeners, no one's going to take better care of you than you. Okay? So don't expect Prince Charming to come take better care of you, because he can't. He's got his own battles to fight. And so you got to put yourself first. What are some other misconceptions that people have about handling stress and anxiety?
Well, sometimes people that are having stress and anxiety, their friends or loved ones want to say, oh, just get over it or just calm down.
Which only aggravates it even more.
It invalidates their feelings. It makes them feel judged. And that hinders the healing process right there. If you're stressed and anxious, but you're feeling judged, like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way, then you're not going to be able to talk about your feelings or the stress that's weighing you down or the fear. And sometimes just talking about the fear and voicing it and getting it out to someone else can really help.
Yes, but you got to be very careful who you express that to. So what are some general caveats that you would tell our listeners as far as venting or vomiting your feelings or what you're going through to someone else?
Well, just make sure it's a trusted friend.
Yes.
And you might even tell them beforehand, I have a lot of stuff I really need to just get off my chest. Would you be a willing listener? Then that way they know that they're not having to fix it or trying to make you feel better, that you're just getting it off your chest.
Reminds me of the author of, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Yeah. The nature of women is sometimes they just want to vent. And us men, we want to fix whatever it is that they're venting. So it's useful to just say, just give me some time. Just give me some space. I just need to get things off my mind without necessarily expecting the other person to fix you.
Or agree with them.
Yeah, true. Tell us, what are some other misconceptions that people have that you've seen in your practice about stress and anxiety?
They think that they can manage it on their own. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. They may be able to manage it for a certain period of time, but then what happens, if they're not using positive coping skills, if they're not getting the emotions out, then that stress comes back worse than it was before because then something else happened that they have.
Yes, and you and I know that feelings is your body talking to you. And sometimes people don't know what to do with that communication. What would you tell listeners? Again, if you're getting a feeling, which again, that's an automatic gut feeling, gut reaction, gut processing of something that is happening in your environment or a single thought that you might have, it's like your body's going to be talking to you. So what would you tell our listeners as far as processing feelings as opposed to just stuffing them and just dissociating from the feelings?
Very important to process them. In this day and age, I think that people think that they look at social media and everybody's happy and all this stuff, and then they think they're the only ones that are having these feelings. But what happens if you repress them, it shows up later as anxiety. That's literally what anxiety is.
Exactly.
It's these repressed feelings. So it's important to honor those feelings, even if it's a thought or even if it's something that happened 10 years ago that you still feel bad about. Don't judge yourself. I have a lot of my clients that say, I don't understand why I'm feeling this. It happened 10 years ago. And I say, it doesn't matter. You're feeling it. Let's talk about it and process it.
Yes. Listeners, in a previous episode, I highly recommend that if you have unprocessed feelings, read the book, Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. The author's last name is Kuhn. I can't remember the name, but in the book, she outlines the number of feelings which we're capable of experiencing, which is over 750 feelings. Imagine 750 ways that the body communicates with us, and most of us can only identify what we're feeling in both hands. Maybe it's just one hand, fear, love. So it's important to understand what your body is telling you because you need to pay attention. Your body is needing attention. And again, if you deny it or if you repress it, then it's going to manifest as anxiety.
And this is very interesting. Studies show that people go to great lengths to repress feelings. They drink them away. They over-exercise, all kind of things to experience feelings. But if you allow that feeling to come...
That's interesting. You've become familiar with Adele's story. She had a therapist that was very wise, that she told her, if you have a panic attack, this is what's happening in your body. And I recommend that you just experience the attack. Breathe through it. Just sit with it. That's just your body needing to release. That was very useful because whenever she felt a panic attack, she would try to keep it together at the office. But then when she got home, she crashed. And sometimes she would take days to be with that panic attack. And again, that was the catharsis, the blooming of the trauma that was layered, of course, that needed to come to the surface to be processed. So excellent advice. So tell us, Suzanna, for someone who wants to stay informed but not overwhelmed, what's your advice for creating balance?
Well, I think like I mentioned before, setting a time limit on how much you're going to watch the news and engage in political discussions, or even if it's not politics, it could be something else. And don't get your validation from social media.
Yes.
So many of my clients get their validation.
And that's the last place, because rather than building you up, all they want to do is tear you down and criticize you.
And then people compare themselves. Comparison is the thief of joy, because then you're never satisfied with what you have, because then you look at, so-and-so on a cruise in Costa Rica, and all of a sudden you're dissatisfied.
Yes. Unfortunately, that's the case. Are there strategies to set healthy boundaries with news and social media that you recommend or you've learned to use yourself?
Just to not watch it like you did. Just turn it off. Watch the local news. If you want to watch the news, watch the local news. Become aware of what's going on in your community.
Yes.
And then focus on that, or use your values to see how you can contribute to your community in a positive way.
Yes. All politics is local. If you know what's going on in your community and you're the kind of person that wants to be engaged, find what is happening in your community. If there's a petition to build a new park, get involved. If there is something that is near and dear to your heart right in your own community, go to City Hall. Follow different representatives in your district so that you can make a difference right here in your community to channel that energy as opposed to just simmering on it, stewing on it, and then harming your health. Because what happens when we live in a constant state of anxiety and stress, Suzanna?
Your body starts falling apart.
Yes.
You start getting aches and pains. You could, I have some clients that have autoimmune diseases because they were in abusive relationships for years, and because the body is not made to be tense like this all the time. Because every muscle in your body stays tense when you're in that flight.
Yeah. You're listening to Courageous Healing Podcast. We'll be right back.
Looking for the perfect soundtrack to bring your project to life? Meet Roy D. Haston, an experienced composer who creates captivating music for films, commercials, and live events. From emotional scores to upbeat, energetic tracks, Roy's compositions add depth and emotion to every story. His unique soundscapes elevate your project and leave a lasting impression. Visit roydhaston.com and discover how Roy's music can transform your next project into something unforgettable. And thank you, Roy, for your original music for our Courageous Healing podcast.
We now return you to the Courageous Healing podcast. Dr. Gabor Mate, he says, I don't know if you read him, according to his research, if you live in a constant state of stress, that is the formula for you to suffer from Alzheimer's in your when you're older. Yeah. So it's very important that we watch our stress levels because the consequences to your body, cortisol that is produced in our body, goes straight to attacking the heart muscle. So very, very important to stay abreast of your health and your state of mind as well as your physical state. Which again, that's I turned it all off, and that's what I'm focusing on. And I have so much more time. I used to binge read it every morning because I've been a political consultant and I worked in news organizations. I just got acclimated and I figured I had to be informed all the time. But I don't, okay? It's like I said, I follow my own advice in that if something happens, I'm not going to be able to affect change. So only focus on the things that I can affect change, which is working with clients. All right. What should our listeners be on the lookout for to avoid common pitfalls? Suzanna?
Well, some common pitfalls is one of the things, if you have learned some coping strategies, don't jump around from coping strategy to coping strategy. You know, like some of my clients will say, yeah, I tried that 30-second breathing, but it didn't work. So then I want to do this. No, we're going to perfect the 30-second breathing because it's highly effective. We're going to work on it until you can go for 30 seconds. But that's very important because then you're giving up.
Yeah.
And you're not even giving your body a chance to acclimate to feeling peace. Some of my clients, when they finally start feeling peace, they don't know what's going on in their body and they think they're bored.
Yes. Yeah. Because
going, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be upset about something here.
Yeah, they're addicted to the adrenaline from the drama that they tend to either live in or they generate. Some of them are machines for generating drama. That again, that's how most people feel alive. Isn't it sad, Suzanna, that most people don't know how to feel alive and be human, just to be?
And especially within the past decade, I've really seen an increase in the number of people suffering from it.
There was a study done that people would rather be shocked than be bored. Really? Yes. People would rather be shocked than to be bored. In a clinical study that they did, that they put a electrocution machine and they told them just to sit and be still. They would rather go and be electrocuted on the machine rather than being bored.
Boredom's tied to fear, so there might be something.
Exactly.
Also, boredom is your imagination screaming at you.
That's true. That is true.
To engage it. We have lost our imagination.
We have. We sure have. Our minds have become flabby and obese from all the crap that we've taken in as opposed to really exercising.
That's a really good way to put it.
It reminds me of the psychologist William James. He said most people think they're thinking when all they're doing is they're just rearranging their prejudices. It's like, when was the last time you had an original thought as opposed to just moving around stuff that you've taken in from social media or regurgitating what people have told you as opposed to really critical, original thinking? I don't know of anyone. Do you?
We have to get that back.
You have to make it your business. All right. Any other pitfalls, and what other behaviors or mindsets would worsen the anxiety, Suzanna?
Well, another pitfall is expecting instant relief or to do it perfectly.
Yes.
So you're not, once you start practicing mindfulness, you're not going to do it perfectly all the time. And I have some perfectionistic clients that will just throw their hands up and say, well, I didn't do it every day. And I'm like, well, did you do it once? Yeah, I did it 3 times. Well, yay, you did it 3 times. Let's congratulate you on that instead of striving for perfection. And then also expecting instant relief in our society of instant gratification. I mean, think about it. We have a computer in our hand, like me and you grew up going to the library looking for Rolodex, right? And so we expect instant gratification, but the journey to self-discovery and learning how to control your anxiety, it's a minute. It takes a minute.
I recommend to clients that you spend 15 minutes in alone you time with your thoughts. And again, listen to your thoughts because we have approximately 60,000 thoughts every day, and the majority of them are the same ones day in and day out. That's the programming. Day in and day out, same thoughts. Start journaling to start to listen to your thoughts, and you begin to see patterns emerge. What's the narrative that you carry? What are the stories you tell yourself that again lead to the anxiety that you generate as a result of that mental chatter in your mind? Okay? Any other recommendations around that? Let's go on to questions from our audience, because I put out a request knowing that we would be having you as a guest. And this is what some followers asked. We'll start out with a general one. This woman says, how can I help my children to deal with anxiety of separation, knowing and being anxious that maybe I won't be picking them up or the father won't be picking them up? They're right now going through a divorce, and the father may not pick them up for the weekend whenever it's his time to be with them. How can you, what advice, general advice would you give to a mother like that?
Just be consistent, and be consistent in the discipline, be consistent in the love that she shows. I know that the mother's going through a lot of stress right now, so getting care of herself is one of the best things.
That's true.
For herself, and do some of the mindfulness.
Because the children feel some of that stress.
Oh, they pick up on everything.
Yes. They're like sponges.
They can sense energy in the room shift. And so by getting help for herself, that will help her instill the calmness in her children. Maybe practicing some of the mindfulness techniques with them to help them with those thoughts, right? So maybe dad didn't show up this time, but dad loves you. Mom will always be here. And just reinforcing that same narrative over and over.
Okay. We have a couple other questions from our followers. One follower wrote, she wanted me to ask you, what are some common roadblocks to healing? Because you and I know that if you are suffering from some trauma, you're going to have pervasive, generalized anxiety. So what are some common roadblocks to healing?
Trusting the process.
Yes.
Finding a therapist that you can trust to lead you on the journey is super important.
That is highly critical. And I want to drill down on this because some people will go to a therapist, 1 or 2, they have a bad experience or they don't connect with them. And they think that all therapists are like that. And they give up and they never pursue finding a therapist that they can connect with. Why is that important, Suzanna?
Because different people relate well to different personality types. And so, you know, you might have to go to 2 or 3 appointments. Most therapists give a 15-minute phone consultation to find one.
What advice would you give patients that are looking for the right therapist for them?
To make a list of questions about what you want in therapy, to see if the therapist will be able to meet them, to find out where they went to school. That's important.
Yeah.
To make sure that they're really licensed. And then you can tell a lot by talking to a person.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I know my clients, they said they just had a feel.
Okay.
Right? Like maybe you can't put your finger on it, but there's just a connection.
Sure, a vibe.
Yeah.
They feel your empathy and know that you're going to take care of them, that you're going to be honest with them, that you're not going to enable them to keep them coming to you for life, as opposed to, are you a practitioner of brief therapy?
Yes, I will do brief therapy.
Okay, good. Explain to our listeners what that is. Brief therapy, what that generally means.
You'll come in for the first session. We'll get to know each other. The second session, we'll do goals. Like you'll come in with some very specific goals, and then we'll work on the strategies to get you those goals. You take the strategies with you. You go and try them. Come back a few months later, and we tweak it.
Okay, very good. Another question from one of our followers. What do you see when people are doing the work to heal? What do you commonly see? What is it that you see in your practice when people are really serious about doing the work?
Well, they do the homework. They're willing to give up their negative thoughts. They're willing to. This is what I find most interesting is the clients who are willing to not judge themselves so harshly. Most people judge themselves very harshly.
There was a study that was done with people that were at the end of their life. They asked them, what regrets do you have? That was one of them, is I wish I wouldn't have been so harsh on myself.
And so people that judge themselves, it's more difficult to move through the therapeutic process because they're stopping themselves at every point because they think they shouldn't be feeling this, or why can't I get through this, or how come I have this problem and so doesn't. And then asking why, people that ask why stay in a loop of, but why? There is no why. Why did my mother treat me like that? Because she was a flawed individual.
Yeah.
There is no why. It is what it is. Let's deal with it.
Absolutely. All right. Now for a quick round of fun questions. What's one book or resource you'd recommend to anyone trying to learn more about mental health?
That's a hard question. About mental health, I'd say mental health that I like Feeling Good by David Burns.
One of my favorites all time. Do you know that it was through David Burns' work and that book that I started studying psychology? Yeah, I talked to David Burns when I was going through one of my most difficult episodes after my schizophrenic wife had a nervous breakdown. And she was in the hospital, and after 5 psychiatrists, they couldn't tell me if she would ever come out of her psychosis. I'm scared, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. And of course, my in-laws, I call them my outlaws, were blaming me. They said, you caused it. So David Burns had just released the book, okay? So I'm driving, and I said, oh my God, this is great. So I pull over. I didn't have a cell phone. I pulled over, called into the station because I wanted to ask him a question. And he says, what you're going through is normal. He says, listen to me. I'm the expert here. You did not cause her breakdown, okay? After that, I was good. Went out and bought the book. I have bought that book and given it away to dozens of people over the years because I can't keep it on the shelf. It's one of the best. So I'm glad that you mentioned that book. What other resources or books can you recommend to people?
I recommend many books to my clients, well, except for the David Burns book. But there's one book that I think is timeless, and that is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel.
I know him personally.
That book started me on this journey. It changed my life. It's timeless.
The Toltec, the wisdom of the Toltecs, yes.
Disagreeing, I went through that night.
Yeah.
Disagreed with all of the stuff that my ex-husband had fed into me that I agreed with him during that time.
Sure.
And it was so beautiful and freeing.
Yeah.
And I love the meditations at the back about love. And I love that book. I keep believing them in person.
The reason that I know him personally, the reason that I know him personally is because one of my clients was one of his promoters and marketers. Yes, that she actually brought him to El Paso to do a big a lecture to hundreds of people. So I got to meet him. I got to meet him backstage and interact with him. Yeah, it was very interesting. Years later, at the event, he talked about that transformation that he went through. I believe it was in Sonora. Don't hold me to it. That it was a pitch black night with the stars up above, and he had this transformation, and he came into his own personal power. But it sounded like he had a mystical experience.
He talks about it in the book.
Yeah.
He describes it in great detail.
Yeah. So yeah, I know Miguel Ruiz. What's your favorite way to de-stress after a long day of working with clients?
Well, there's a beautiful park by my house, and I like to go and I'll do one lap around the park to de-stress. While I'm at the park, I'm not just walking, but there's a lot of trees there, and I will go up and mindfully look at the tree, touch it, smell it. That's putting all of your senses on something else that is beautiful, and it's very calming.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a tree hugger.
Well, full disclosure, I used to be critical of tree huggers because I thought that was hippy-dippy crap, but I have come a believer because I did the science behind it, and they are full of energy. Trees are full of energy, and again, think of the energy that is coming up through the roots, up through the trunk. All of the water that is being pulled. Water has a vibration, it has an energy. And when we hug a tree, we're actually aligning ourselves to that energy, which is healing energy too.
It really is.
Very green energy.
But there's a difference between hugging an indigenous tree than a tree that was planted. I didn't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
You can feel the difference. Well,
really?
I can. But like the old trees in San Antonio, like I get a supercharge from them.
Wow. I'll have to keep that in mind. Yesterday, I went down by the bayou to do some walking in the grass, barefoot, and to hug a couple of trees because again, I needed to charge my body.
Yeah.
And so, listeners, I'm a big fan of tree hugging. Try it.
And that's a grounding technique.
Yes.
We come from the earth and we never touch it.
Yes.
How often do we ever touch the dirt? And that's a grounding technique, putting your feet in the grass, touching the tree. And I don't know if your research, if you realize that trees talk to each other.
They do.
Root system, and they communicate with each other. And so that energy is alive and flowing.
Yes. If we really want to get really scientific, all matter communicates with itself because all matter is made up of the same energy. There we get into quantum mechanics and quantum physics, which again, now we have the science of what's really going on. So you can disconnect from the anxiety and the fear and connect to the grounding, healing energy of a peaceful environment. I was going to mention there was another study I read about that was done at Cambridge, that if you walk among greenery with a body of water, you're also increasing the connections in your prefrontal cortex, which again is tied to having discipline, having the control over your mind and body. So highly, highly recommended. What you're doing is great because you're taking, instead of taking a happy pill, you're taking the natural route of de-stressing and clearing your body.
Yes. And that brings up another barrier to getting better is like judging things like that. Like you said, well, I don't get tree huggers. If you tell someone to do that and they immediately shut it down, well, I'm not going to do that. I would be embarrassed. It's like you got to push through that feeling of embarrassment. That's what change feels like. I don't know if you knew that. Whenever you start something new and you feel embarrassed or you feel awkward, you have to push through that.
Yes.
Because that's what change feels like. And a lot of people come up against that and they just stop in their tracks.
Absolutely. I'm a believer. Which brings us to alcohol use disorder using pharmacological approach. What is that? That's the first time that I hear about that. Tell us.
I have seen such a change in my clients. It's actually called the Sinclair method.
Okay.
It's a pharmacological approach. And so they use a very safe pill called naltrexone. It's very cheap. It's very safe. It doesn't interact with any other drugs, and there are no side effects.
Okay.
You take the pill an hour before you drink, every time you drink, and eventually you quit drinking. The desire for the alcohol goes away. It's much like if you think about Pavlov's dogs.
Sure. The conditioning.
It's the conditioning.
Yeah.
So with the dogs, they give them meat and ring a bell.
Mm-hmm.
And then they quit giving them meat and they ring the bell and the dog still salivated.
Correct.
Okay. Well, the naltrexone is like,
It's a reconditioning of the nervous system because every time that you take a pill, the body knows that you're going to go into an altered state. And so sometimes, and again, for highly experienced users, simply the act of seeing the pill and bringing it up to your mouth automatically triggers the neuroreceptors, the mirror receptors in your brain that your body anticipates going into that mode. So yeah, it's totally repatterning and reconditioning the nervous system. Because listeners, the reason that overcoming does it only work for alcohol?
I'm only using it for alcohol.
Okay.
I'm not up on the research for any.
Okay. Well, the reason that it's so difficult because I come from this field of chemical intervention counseling, is that your amygdala, the center in your brain for urges, is triggered, and so you're talking about biology, overcoming your mental prowess to try to mind over matter. It's like, no, your matter is going to mind your mind. Because you can't fight those urges. And so taking this approach sure sounds like a common sense approach.
Yes. And so what happens is you still feel the effects of the alcohol. You don't have to go cold turkey or go through detox, but the pill blocks the amygdala from getting the pleasure principle receptor from the alcohol. And then eventually the brain gives up. And so when you put alcohol in, the brain
no longer gets a high. Yeah.
Right?
That takes the fun out of it.
Then people reach what we call extinction.
Yeah.
And when they reach extinction, then they don't want to drink anymore. It is the most amazing thing. I have been working with alcoholics for a very long time. And I have to tell you, Victor, I have never been so excited about that.
That's great. That's great. I will have to refer you patients if they come to me. Any last words or advice or insights, Suzanna?
I just want to let people know that they have to take care of themselves. No one's going to come and put down their social media. No one's going to come and turn the TV off for them. No one's going to come and make them go walk in the park and hook a tree. Like, taking the action to take care of yourself and if you can become your own best friend, life is so much easier.
Absolutely. Learn to live in your skin. Yes. How can people connect with you or learn more about your work? You do also telehealth, don't you?
Well, I'm rolling out my telehealth platform within the next month. I'm super excited about it. That way I'll be able to reach more people throughout the state, not just locally, that people can drive to me. So I'm excited about that. Okay. That will be coming out in a month. And then you can just email me at that email address, Suzanna.Abel@gmail.com.
Okay.
Right now, I'm seeing clients with Spencer & Associates. Mm-hmm. And the phone number is 832-756-2749.
And we'll have that information in the show notes list.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about rolling out the telehealth platform because I can reach more people with a pharmacological approach than just a month's couple of zip codes.
That's great. Any final words?
I just really enjoyed being here.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure that if we have questions from our listeners, we're going to turn to you as the expert. And we're going to quote you as the source of the advice that you give listeners when it comes to dealing with issues related to family violence. You got to come back, Suzanna, because we'd like to have you as part of the team of Courageous Healing, because you bring a lot of resources and a lot of value to helping victims who are suffering from domestic violence. Well, that's going to do it, friends. One final disclaimer. This podcast episode is only for educational purposes. That does not mean that Suzanna Abel has any client relationship with you by listening to this podcast. So we just like to let you know. Until next time, go out and have a great week.